I had spent 3 years turning my body into a weapon, but I knew that a single drop of sweat compromising the patch on my neck would expose the dangerous, lethal secret hidden beneath my skin. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you are ready for an intense, action-packed boy love story full of dangerous secrets, elite soldiers, found family, and heart-pounding romance, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below to let me know you're excited for this new series. Your support helps me create more of these stories for you. Now get comfortable, because we are diving right into the action. Part 1. The Scent of Treason. The mud of the training arena was thick and unforgiving, clinging to Riley Steele's combat boots like a desperate hand trying to drag him down into the earth. Heavy, relentless rain lashed against the high-voltage fences of Sector 4's military compound, washing away the sweat and the grime of the day. But no amount of rain could wash away the heavy, suffocating stench of alpha pheromones that saturated the camp. Riley wiped the back of his tactical glove across his mouth, leaving a smear of crimson. At 22 years old, he had survived 3 grueling years in the Vanguard Infantry by making himself entirely invisible. He kept his head down, his scores perfectly average, and his mouth shut. But right now, standing in the center of the sparring ring against a towering alpha recruit named Vane, being invisible was entirely out of the question. "Come on, Steele," Vane sneered, circling Riley with the arrogant, predatory grace of a wolf closing in on a wounded deer. His scent, a sharp, aggressive burst of burnt ozone and pine, spiked with intense irritation. "You fight like a beta with a broken leg. I thought you were supposed to be fast." Riley didn't answer. He couldn't afford to. If he opened his mouth, he might scream from the exhaustion, and if he lost control of his carefully measured breathing, the illegal, high-grade suppressant patch burning at the base of his neck might finally fail. In Neo-Elysium, genetics were destiny. The societal hierarchy was absolute. Alphas ruled the military and the government, betas served as the working class, and omegas. Omegas were considered fragile property. Valued only for their breeding capabilities and their calming sense, an omega in the military was not just unheard of, it was a high treason offense. If caught, the punishment was an immediate, forceful transfer to the sanctuaries, gilded cages where omegas were paired off against their will. Worse yet, domestic terrorist groups were currently ravaging the borders, fighting to strip omegas of even the meager human rights they had left, aiming to return society to a dark age of absolute enslavement. Riley had sworn to himself, the night he ran away from his abusive, controlling family, that he would rather die bleeding on a battlefield than end up as someone's obedient pet. So he had lied. He forged his genetic markers, bought black market suppressants that made his veins feel like they were flooded with battery acid, and trained until his bones cracked just to pass as a beta. Vane lunged. It was a brutal, overpowering strike aimed right at Riley's jaw, meant to break bone and establish dominance. Riley's instincts, sharpened by a lifetime of hiding and anticipating pain, flared to life. He didn't just see the punch coming. He felt the violent shift in the air. Dropping his center of gravity, Riley slipped beneath Vane's massive, swinging arm, pivoting sharply on his heel. He didn't try to match the Alpha's strength. That would be suicide. Instead, he used Vane's own momentum against him, grabbing the Alpha's thick wrist and driving his elbow sharply into the vulnerable junction of the man's shoulder blade. Vane let out a breathless roar of pain, crashing into the thick mud with a heavy, satisfying thud. The circle of soldiers surrounding the sparring ring fell dead silent. A beta wasn't supposed to take down an alpha that easily. A beta certainly wasn't supposed to humiliate a top-ranking recruit in front of the entire platoon. Riley stood over the groaning man, his chest heaving, the cold rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He had won the spar, but a sudden, icy spike of sheer panic instantly pierced his chest. He had moved too fast. He had extended his body too far. And worse, the violent, twisting motion of his evasive maneuver had strained the medical adhesive of his collar. A sudden, sharp tingle rushed down Riley's spine, followed by a terrifying rush of cool air against his feverish skin. The scent blocker was peeling. It was just a millimeter, just a fraction of a breath. But in a camp full of genetically enhanced super soldiers, it was a death sentence. The faint, undeniable scent of wild cherries and crushed ashes leaked into the damp, rainy air. It was a distinctly omega scent, soft, alluring, and completely, dangerously out of place in a ring full of hyper-aggressive, testosterone-fueled soldiers. Vane, who was still struggling in the mud, suddenly stopped groaning. His nostrils flared wildly. The other alphas standing in the front row of the circle shifted, their eyes widening in collective shock. The hostility in the air rapidly morphed into a dark, primal possessiveness that made Riley's stomach drop to his boots. "What is that?" someone muttered from the crowd, stepping forward. "Steel," Vane growled, pushing himself up slowly. His eyes locked onto Riley with a horrifying, hungry intensity that stripped away all his previous anger. "What the hell are you hiding?" Riley took a step back, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped, frantic bird. He reached up, pretending to wipe the rain from his neck, subtly and desperately pressing the patch back down against his skin. But the damage was already done. The air was thick, suffocating with tension. The pack mentality was taking over. They were going to corner him. They were going to tear him apart. Riley slowly reached for the combat knife strapped to his right thigh, his mind racing through escape routes. He was ready to fight his way out of the camp, even if it meant becoming a fugitive. "Stand down." The voice wasn't a shout, but it cut through the heavy rain and the rising, suffocating bloodlust like a sharpened scythe. The entire crowd of soldiers immediately snapped to attention, their aggressive posturing vanishing in an instant as they saluted perfectly. Riley froze, his hand still hovering over his knife, and slowly turned his head toward the sound. Striding through the mud, parting the crowd of soldiers like the Red Sea, was Captain Kalen Cross. He was a living legend within the military. The commander of Tactical Team 07, widely known as the Phantom Squad. They were the elite, highly classified Black Ops unit that hunted the extremist terrorist cells trying to overthrow the government. Cross was an alpha among alphas, a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency on the battlefield was matched only by the terrifying, icy calm he carried with him at all times. He was tall, powerfully built, dressed in pitch-black tactical gear, with piercing silver eyes that looked like they could strip the flesh right off your bones. His scent hit Riley like a physical blow, dark timber, approaching thunderstorms, and sharp mint. It was so overwhelmingly powerful, so pure in its dominance, that Riley's knees actually trembled. The suppressed Omega instincts he fought so hard to bury deep inside himself screamed at him to submit, to lower his eyes and bare his neck. Riley bit the inside of his cheek so hard he tasted fresh blood, forcing his spine to remain completely straight. He would not bow. Captain Cross stopped at the edge of the ring. His silver eyes swept over Vane, who was practically shaking with nervous energy, and then slowly, deliberately settled on Riley. For an agonizing, heart-stopping second, those metallic eyes flicked to the collar of Riley's wet shirt. He knows. The realization hit Riley like a speeding freight train. Cross's face betrayed absolutely no emotion, a perfect mask of military discipline, but the slight, almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes was enough. "Cadet Vane," Cross said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down Riley's spine. "You let an infantryman half your size put you face first in the mud. Go run the perimeter in the storm until you forget how to feel embarrassment." "Sir." "Yes, sir." Vane scrambled to his feet and sprinted away into the rain, the unnatural, dangerous tension of the crowd finally breaking. Cross looked back at the rest of the silent recruits. "Drill is over. Disperse." He didn't wait to watch them scatter. He finally turned his full, terrifying attention back to Riley, his gaze heavy and assessing. "Steel. My office. Now." Riley swallowed hard, the lump in his throat feeling like swallowed glass. This was it. It was over. He was going to be exposed, court-martialed for treason, and handed over to the breeding facilities before the sun came up. But as he followed the broad, imposing back of the captain through the rain-swept compound, a strange, rebellious fire ignited in his chest. If he was going down, he wasn't going down begging. Cross's office was stark and minimalistic, smelling faintly of old black coffee and that intoxicating, overwhelming timber scent. The heavy iron door slammed shut behind them, the metallic lock clicking into place with a sound of utter finality. Riley stood perfectly at attention, his hands clasped behind his back, staring straight ahead at the blank gray wall. "Sir." Cross walked around his heavy desk, but didn't sit in his chair. Instead, he leaned back against the edge of the desk, crossing his thick arms over his chest. He studied Riley for a long, suffocating minute, listening to the rain batter against the window pane. "Wild cherries and ash," Cross said quietly, his voice dangerously smooth. "It's an incredibly bold choice to bring a scent like that into an Alpha infantry camp, Steel." Riley's breath hitched, his heart skipping a beat, but he kept his facial expression completely blank. "I don't know what you're talking about, Captain. It must be a new brand of standard-issue soap." "Drop the act, Riley," Cross replied. Hearing his first name on the captain's lips felt strangely intimate, sending a jolt through his system. Cross's tone was surprisingly devoid of anger or disgust. Instead, there was a sharp, calculating curiosity in his silver eyes. I've been watching you for 6 months. You push yourself twice as hard as the men, you isolate yourself in the barracks to avoid physical contact, and your medical records are an absolute masterpiece of digital forgery. You're an Omega. Riley's hand instinctively twitched toward his empty holster. If you're going to arrest me, sir, just get it over with. I won't go quietly. Cross let out a low, rough sound that might have been a chuckle. It was a rich, warm sound that completely contradicted his terrifying reputation. Arrest you? If I wanted you arrested, you'd be in chains right now. I don't give a damn about the military's archaic, pathetic genetic policies, Steele. I give a damn about results, and I give a damn about survival. Riley blinked, his rigid military posture faltering for the very first time. He looked directly into the captain's eyes, searching for the trap. What? Cross reached behind him and picked up a thick, black confidential folder from his desk. He tossed it casually. It landed on the table directly in front of Riley with a heavy thud. The domestic extremists are mobilizing in the outer sectors, Cross explained, his expression hardening, his eyes darkening with dangerous intent. They are actively capturing Omegas, trafficking them across the border, trying to force the government's hand to repeal the few protection laws your kind have left. My squad, Tactical Team 07, is deploying in 48 hours on a highly classified mission to hunt down their primary leadership. Team 07 is entirely made up of elite alphas, Riley said, his voice hoarse, his mind struggling to process the sudden shift in reality. What does this have to do with me? You should be locking me up. Because an all-alpha squad is loud. They smell us coming from a mile away. They expect us to fight a certain way. Cross pushed off the desk, stepping closer. His proximity made the air crackle with intense static. He leaned in slightly, his height forcing Riley to look up. His voice dropped to a low, commanding whisper that vibrated right through Riley's chest. I need a ghost, Riley. Someone who can slip through the cracks unnoticed. Someone who fights with the sheer, unrelenting desperation of a man who has absolutely everything to lose. And quite frankly, after watching you put that arrogant meathead in the mud out there, I want you on my team. Riley stared at the black folder, his mind spinning. You want an Omega on an elite Black Ops team? Your men will tear me apart the second they find out. My men will follow my orders, Cross said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument or doubt. It was the voice of an alpha who commanded absolute loyalty. I am offering you a choice. Riley, stay here, wait for your cheap suppressants to fail completely, and let the military police drag you off to a sanctuary to be some rich politician's toy. Or, you pack your gear, sign this transfer paper, and come with me to kill the bastards who want to put you in chains. Riley looked up into Kalen Cross's silver eyes. He expected to see pity, or the dark, predatory lust he saw in every other alpha who looked at an Omega. But all he saw was genuine respect. A challenge. An equal. Riley slowly reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and placed his palm flat on the black folder. The suffocating fear that had lived in his chest for 3 years was suddenly, violently swallowed by a burning, reckless hope. When do we leave, Captain? End of Part 1. Part 2, Into the Wolf's Den. The barracks were suffocatingly quiet at 0400 hours. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic drumming of the rain against the corrugated metal roof. Riley stood perfectly still in front of his narrow, unforgiving cot, staring at the small olive-drab duffel bag that contained his entire life. 3 standard-issue uniforms, a worn-out combat knife, and a false identity. That was all he had to his name. His fingers drifted to the base of his neck, hovering just over the fresh medical adhesive. He had applied a new military-grade suppressant patch less than an hour ago. The chemicals were already seeping into his bloodstream, working overtime to neutralize his natural pheromones. It felt like a nest of angry wasps buzzing just beneath his skin, burning and itching with a localized fever. But the physical pain was a small price to pay for survival. He was actually doing this. He was leaving the Vanguard Infantry to join Tactical Team 07, the Phantom Squad. A heavy knock echoed through the empty hallway, followed by the sharp crunch of boots on the concrete. Riley didn't need to turn around to know it was time. He swung the duffel bag over his shoulder, ignoring the dull ache in his muscles from the previous day's spar, and walked out of the barracks without a single backward glance. The classified hangar located on the far east side of Sector 4 was a massive, cavernous structure of steel and shadows. As Riley stepped through the heavy blast doors, the air instantly changed. It was thick, heavy, and absolutely vibrating with an overwhelming concentration of alpha energy. Standard infantry camps were chaotic, filled with the loud, unrefined aggression of untested soldiers. This place, however, was different. The dominance here was quiet, controlled, and infinitely more lethal. Sitting around a steel crate that had been repurposed into a makeshift table were three men. They didn't look like standard soldiers. They looked like predators resting between hunts. The largest of the three, a man with arms the size of tree trunks and a scarred jawline, was meticulously cleaning a heavy machine gun. Next to him sat a lean, dangerously graceful man with sharp, predatory eyes, absent-mindedly tossing a throwing knife into the air and catching it by the blade. The third man, with a rugged, unshaven face and a cynical smirk, was scrolling through a tactical tablet. The moment Riley's boots hit the metal grating of the floor, three pairs of eyes snapped toward him. The silence that fell over the hangar was absolute and suffocating. Riley forced his heart rate to remain steady. He locked down his Omega instincts, burying the primal urge to lower his eyes. He kept his chin up, his spine completely straight, and walked directly toward them. "Well, well," the lean man with the knife drawled, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. His scent was sharp citrus and gunpowder. "Looks like the quartermaster sent us a lost little lamb. Are you looking for the mailroom, kid?" "I'm looking for Team 07, Riley replied, his voice flat, completely devoid of the intimidation they clearly expected. The giant cleaning the machine gun paused, his heavy brow furrowing. He looked Riley up and down, taking in his slender, compact frame. "You've got to be kidding me. You're the replacement? You look like a stiff breeze could snap you in half." "I assure you, I don't break easily," Riley said, meeting the giant's gaze without blinking. The third man laughed, a harsh, scraping sound. "A beta. The captain brought us a beta. I mean, no offense, kid, but this is a Black Ops heavy assault unit. We don't need someone we have to babysit when the bullets start flying. If you need a babysitter, I'm sure I can find someone to hold your hand," Riley shot back, his tone deceptively mild. The lean man's eyes widened slightly, a spark of genuine amusement cutting through his hostility. The giant, however, scowled, standing up to his full, terrifying height. He took a step toward Riley, deliberately projecting his heavy, oppressive alpha aura, a wave of burnt iron and wet earth meant to force submission. "Watch your mouth, recruit," the giant rumbled, towering over Riley. "You might have a smart tongue, but out in the field, attitude won't stop a bullet." Riley didn't flinch. He didn't take a single step back. He tilted his head slightly, his hand resting casually near his thigh, inches from his blade. "Neither will being 7 feet tall, but I don't hear anyone complaining about you." A heavy, dangerous tension snapped into place. The giant's jaw tightened, and the air grew thick with a warning. "That's enough, Jax." The command echoed through the hangar, low but carrying an absolute, unquestionable authority. Captain Kalen Cross emerged from the shadows of a nearby tactical transport vehicle. He was already dressed in full combat gear, his black tactical vest loaded with ammunition, his silver eyes cutting through the dimly lit room. The three men instantly relaxed their aggressive postures, turning their attention to their commanding officer. The oppressive alpha aura in the room immediately shifted, bending completely to Kalen's presence. The scent of dark timber and approaching thunderstorms washed over Riley, grounding him, even as it made his hidden Omega instincts hum with a confusing mix of anxiety and reverence. "Captain," Jax grunted, gesturing a massive hand toward Riley. "With all due respect, what is this? A beta? We are deploying into Sector 0 in an hour. We need a heavy hitter, not a liability." Kalen walked slowly to the center of the group, stopping right beside Riley. He didn't look at Riley, but the sheer proximity of the imposing alpha felt like a protective shield against the hostility of the others. "What you need, Jax, is to follow my orders," Kalen said, his voice dangerously soft. "This is Riley Steele. He outscored every single one of you in close-quarters evasion, and he put Vane in the medbay yesterday with a dislocated shoulder in under 10 seconds. He is our new infiltrator. If any of you have a problem with my judgment, you can hand in your badges right now." The silence returned, but this time it was laced with a new, begrudging respect. Vane was a notorious brute. Putting him in the medbay was no small feat. The lean man with the knife finally sheathed his weapon and offered a slow, sharp grin. "Silas, sniper and recon," he introduced himself. He gestured to the tablet-holding man. "That miserable bastard is document medic and explosives. And the giant with the hurt feelings is Jax." Riley gave a single, tight nod. "Steele. Get geared up, Steele," Kalen ordered, turning to face him. His silver eyes met Riley's, and for a split second, There was a silent, intense communication passing between them. An acknowledgement of the massive, lethal secret they were both keeping from the deadliest men in the military. Don't give them a reason to doubt you. Kalen tossed a heavy bundle of black fabric at Riley's chest. Lose the infantry greens. You are black now. 10 minutes later, Riley emerged from the locker room. The tactical gear of Team 07 was vastly different from standard issue. It was lightweight, reinforced with carbon fiber plating, and designed for silent, lethal movement. The matte black uniform fit Riley perfectly, accentuating his lean, athletic build. As he strapped his combat knife to his chest rig, he caught Kalen watching him from across the hangar. There was a profound, striking intensity in the captain's gaze. It wasn't the ravenous, dehumanizing look Riley was so used to receiving from alphas. It was something entirely different. It was an anchor. "Listen up," Kalen announced, his voice echoing off the metal walls as the team gathered around a holographic tactical map. Target is a heavily fortified compound deep in the outer territories. Intelligence confirms it belongs to the Iron Fang, the extremist cell responsible for the recent border raids. They are heavily armed, deeply entrenched, and they hold zero regard for the laws of engagement. Kalen pressed a button on the console, and a series of grainy, aerial images appeared on the projection. Riley felt his blood run cold. "Our primary objective is the extraction of hostages," Kalen continued, his voice growing grim. "Recon suggests they are holding at least a dozen unregistered Omegas in the sub-basement levels, preparing them for auction to black market syndicates. We are going to breach the perimeter, secure the basement, and burn the rest of the compound to the ground." Riley's hands curled into tight fists. The thought of those Omegas, terrified, bound, treated like livestock, made a violent, white-hot fury ignite in his chest. He had spent his whole life running from that exact fate. Now, he was diving headfirst into the very heart of it. "We drop in 30 minutes, Kalen ordered. "Load out." The interior of the stealth transport plane was dark, illuminated only by the faint red glow of the tactical lights. The roar of the engines made conversation impossible, which Riley was grateful for. He sat strapped into his jump seat, staring straight ahead at the steel bulkhead. The altitude was taking a toll on him. The sudden drop in cabin pressure was interfering with his suppressant patch. The burning sensation at the base of his neck intensified into a sharp, localized agony, and a thin layer of cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He closed his eyes, focusing entirely on regulating his breathing. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Suddenly, a heavy, gloved hand rested on his knee. Riley's eyes snapped open. Kalen was sitting in the jump seat, directly beside him. The captain leaned in close, his broad shoulder brushing against Riley's. Because of the deafening roar of the plane, Kalen had to speak directly into Riley's ear. "Breathe, Steel," Kalen murmured, his deep voice vibrating against Riley's jawline. "Your heart rate is spiking. I can hear it." Riley swallowed hard, turning his head slightly. Their faces were inches apart. The scent of dark timber and rain wrapped around Riley like a heavy, protective blanket, instantly soothing the frantic edges of his panic. It was a biological response, an Omega seeking comfort from a powerful alpha, and Riley hated himself for it, but he couldn't deny how much it helped. "It's the altitude," Riley whispered back, his voice slightly strained. "It's messing with the adhesive." Kalen's silver eyes darkened with concern. He didn't say a word, but he slowly, deliberately shifted his body, positioning himself perfectly to block Riley from the view of the rest of the team. He was shielding him. "We are 5 minutes from the drop zone," Kalen said softly, his gaze locked onto Riley's lips for a fraction of a second before meeting his eyes again. "Can you hold it together, or do I need to ground you?" "I'm fine," Riley said, his voice firming up, his eyes flashing with stubborn defiance. "I'm not leaving those people in that basement, Captain. Not a chance in hell." A faint, incredibly rare shadow of a smile touched the corner of Kalen's mouth. "Good boy." The words sent a sudden, electric shock straight down Riley's spine. The casual, intimate praise, a term usually reserved for Omegas, was spoken with such quiet sincerity that it completely short-circuited Riley's brain. Before he could even begin to process the intense rush of heat blooming in his chest, the warning klaxons blared through the cabin. The red lights switched to a harsh, blinding green. The heavy rear ramp of the transport plane began to lower, revealing the pitch-black, howling abyss of the night sky thousands of feet above the earth. "Team 07, Kalen roared, his voice cutting through the wind as he stood up, becoming the ruthless, untouchable commander once more. "Masks on. Weapons hot. See you on the ground." One by one, the massive alphas dove out into the darkness. Riley stood at the edge of the ramp, the freezing wind tearing at his clothes, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked over his shoulder. Kalen was right behind him, giving him a single, definitive nod. Riley took a deep breath and stepped out into the void. End of Part 2. Part 3, The Ghost of Sector 0. The freefall was a sensory blackout. The roaring wind tore at Riley's tactical suit, biting through the fabric like icy teeth. Plunging through the pitch-black night sky at terminal velocity, there was no sound, no scent, no alpha pheromones to suffocate him, just the pure, terrifying freedom of the void. At exactly 2,000 feet, his altimeter blinked a harsh red. Riley pulled the ripcord. The deceleration was violent, jerking him upward as the stealth black canopy deployed, snapping into the heavy crosswinds. Below him, the dense, hostile wilderness of Sector 0 stretched out like a sea of ink. Through his night vision goggles, the world was painted in stark shades of emerald green and shadow. He adjusted his toggles, banking sharply to avoid the jagged canopy of the ancient pine trees, and aimed for the designated rally point. A muddy ravine half a mile from the terrorist compound. Riley hit the ground rolling. He absorbed the impact with practiced grace, his boots sliding through the wet earth as he instantly unclipped his harness. Before the silk of his parachute could even settle over the ferns, he had drawn his suppressed submachine gun, dropping to one knee and scanning the treeline. A heavy thud echoed to his left. Jax, then Doc and Silas, landing with the heavy, calculated precision of men who did this for a living. Finally, Captain Cross touched down completely silently, a massive, dark silhouette detaching from his chute and melting instantly into the underbrush. Comms check. Kalen's voice crackled low and crisp in Riley's earpiece. Silas green. Doc green. Jax green. Riley swallowed the nervous lump in his throat. Steel. Green. All right, Phantoms, Kalen ordered, stepping out of the shadows. Even in the pouring rain, his presence commanded the very air around them. Silas, find high ground. Overwatch and thermal spotting. Jax, Doc, you hold the perimeter of the western wall. Steel, you are with me. We're taking the point. Move out. They moved through the forest like wraiths. The rain was a blessing, washing away the sound of their footsteps, and more importantly for Riley, completely masking any trace of his scent that might leak from the compromised patch on his neck. Through the foliage, the Iron Fong compound loomed. It was an old, brutalist concrete fortress, surrounded by a 15-foot-high electrified fence and swept by heavy halogen searchlights. Silas's voice crackled over the comms. Captain, I have eyes on the perimeter. 2 tangos on the main gate, heavily armed. 3 more patrolling the eastern catwalk. The western wall is clear of bodies, but the fence is fully charged. Anti-climb sensors are active. Copy that, Silas, Kalen murmured. He crouched behind a rotting log, looking at the massive steel fence. He turned his head, his silver eyes catching the faint moonlight as he looked at Riley. You told me you were an infiltrator, Steel. Prove it. Bypass that grid without triggering the alarm. Jax scoffed quietly over the radio. Captain, I brought breaching charges. I can blow a hole in that fence wide enough to drive a tank through. Don't send the kid to do a sapper's job. Stand down, Jax, Kalen commanded. He didn't break eye contact with Riley. Your move, Ghost. Riley didn't hesitate. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, slipping his tactical gloves off to ensure maximum dexterity. He sprinted low and fast across the open ground, sliding into the mud right beneath the humming, lethal wires of the fence. He pulled a small, illegal military splicer from his belt, a trick he had learned from the black market dealers who sold him his suppressants. The fence wasn't just electrified, it was tied to a tension network. If a wire was cut, the alarm would scream. Riley found the primary junction box near the concrete footing. With agonizing precision, his slender, agile fingers danced over the exposed wiring. He bypassed the main circuit, routing the electrical current through his own handheld device before snipping the heavy mesh. There was a tiny spark, and then nothing. The current flowed perfectly in a loop, leaving a 2-foot gap completely dead. Grid bypassed. Riley whispered into his comms, pulling the mesh back to create a hole. Move up. A moment later, Kalen slid through the opening, followed closely by a very silent, very surprised Jax, and finally Doc. Well, I'll be damned, Jax muttered, looking at the disabled wire. Kid's got fast hands. Focus, Jax, Kalen snapped softly. We're inside. Let's find that sub-basement. The interior courtyard was a maze of stacked shipping crates and heavy machinery. Riley and Kalen moved in perfect tandem. Where Kalen was a force of controlled, unstoppable power, Riley was fluid, slipping through shadows that seemed too small to hide a man. As they rounded the corner of the main barracks, Silas's voice cut in. Contact. 2 patrols coming around your flank, Captain. 10 seconds. There was no cover. The hallway they had slipped into was a dead end, with only a shallow, recessed alcove meant for an emergency fire hose. In here, Kalen grabbed the strap of Riley's tactical vest, hauling him backward into the alcove. It was incredibly tight. Too tight. Kalen had to press Riley entirely flush against the concrete wall, stepping in so close that their bodies were completely flush against one another. Riley let out a sharp, involuntary gasp as Kalen's heavy chest pressed against his own, the captain's arm wrapping firmly around his waist to keep him perfectly still in the shadows. Heavy, combat-booted footsteps echoed around the corner. 2 alphas, speaking in low, gruff voices, completely oblivious to the lethal squad hiding inches away. Riley's heart began to hammer against his ribs like a jackhammer. He was trapped against Kalen. The sheer physical heat radiating from the alpha was intoxicating, melting through Riley's cold, wet uniform. The overwhelming scent of dark timber, rain, and mint enveloped him entirely. His omega biology, battered and suppressed for years, flared up with a sudden, dizzying intensity. He wanted to lean into the chest pressing against him. He wanted to tilt his head back and expose his throat to the powerful man holding him in the dark. Riley squeezed his eyes shut, his breathing growing shallow and erratic. His body was betraying him. The patch at the back of his neck burned like hot coal. Kalen noticed. He always noticed. Feeling the frantic thumping of Riley's heart against his own chest, Kalen slowly, deliberately shifted his weight. He leaned his head down until his lips were hovering less than an inch from the shell of Riley's ear. Hold, Kalen breathed, his deep, gravelly voice barely a vibration in the air. I've got you. Focus on me. Breathe. It was a command, laced with a gentle authority that anchored Riley's spinning mind. Riley took a trembling breath, inhaling Kalen's rich, grounded scent, and forced his muscles to relax. He nodded once, a tiny movement against Kalen's jaw. The footsteps passed. The patrol faded into the distance. Kalen slowly stepped back, releasing his hold on Riley's waist. The sudden absence of the alpha's heat left Riley feeling strangely cold, shivering in the damp night air. Kalen's silver eyes locked onto his, searching his face in the dim light for a long, heavy moment before he gave a single nod of approval. Clear, Silas whispered over the comms. Let's move, Kalen said, his voice returning to its professional, icy standard. They reached the administration building at the center of the compound. According to the blueprints Silas had acquired, the freight elevator leading to the sub-basements was located here. They breached the side door silently. Doc quickly bypassed the electronic lock on the elevator shaft, manually forcing the heavy metal doors open to reveal a pitch-black drop. We rappel down the shaft, Kalen ordered, securing a line to a heavy structural beam. Quietly, Riley slid down the rope, his boots silently hitting the roof of the elevator car before he dropped through the escape hatch into the cab itself. Kalen and the others followed. As they forced the lower doors open, the air rushing up from the sub-basement hit Riley like a physical blow. He staggered, violently choking on a dry heave, his hand flying up to cover his nose and mouth. Steele? Report, Kalen demanded softly, instantly stepping in front of him, weapon raised, scanning the dark corridor. The scent. Riley choked out, his eyes watering, his knees buckling slightly. The corridor reeked. It wasn't the smell of blood or cordite. It was the thick, cloying, sour stench of absolute terror. It was the concentrated pheromones of dozens of terrified, traumatized omegas. The biological distress signals were so potent, so overwhelmingly sad, that Riley's empathetic instincts felt like they were being shredded by broken glass. It was his worst nightmare realized. He was breathing in the exact fate he had sacrificed his entire life to escape. Jax and Doc, being alphas, wrinkled their noses in disgust, but it didn't affect them the way it affected Riley. Kalen looked at Riley, seeing the pale, haunted look on the younger man's face. Without a word, Kalen reached out and placed his heavy, gloved hand firmly on the back of Riley's neck, his thumb resting right at the edge of the illegal suppressant patch. Look at me, Kalen ordered, his voice low, intense, and profoundly grounding. You are not them. You are one of us. You are a phantom. We are here to get them out. Pull it together, soldier. The heat of Kalen's hand, the sheer conviction in his voice, snapped Riley out of his spiral. Riley took a ragged breath, nodding sharply. He shoved his personal trauma down into the darkest corner of his mind and raised his rifle. I'm good. Let's go. They moved down the dimly lit, concrete corridor. At the end of the hall were two massive, reinforced steel doors. Heavy chains locked the handles together. Doc, melt it, Kalen ordered. Doc stepped forward, applying a silent thermal paste to the chains. A blinding white hiss later, the heavy iron melted like butter. Kalen and Jax grabbed the doors, hauling them open with a harsh scrape of metal. Riley rushed in, his rifle sweeping the room, desperate to tell the captives they were safe. But the room was completely empty. There were rows of iron cages, chains bolted to the floors, and dirty cots, but not a single person was inside. The room was utterly deserted. Riley froze, confusion warring with a sudden, chilling dread. The scent of distress was thick, but it was stale. Old. Captain, Jax growled, his massive frame tensing. Where the hell are they? Suddenly, the heavy steel doors they had just walked through slammed shut with a deafening, thunderous clang. The electronic locks engaged, sealing them inside the concrete tomb. High above them, harsh, blinding floodlights snapped on, illuminating a reinforced glass viewing gallery overlooking the holding cells. Standing behind the glass was a tall, scarred alpha wearing the insignia of the Iron Fang. He was grinning down at them, a microphone in his hand. The man's voice crackled through the intercom, echoing menacingly off the concrete walls. Well, well, well. The legendary Phantom Squad. Welcome to Sector 0, Captain Cross. We've been waiting for you. Around the perimeter of the room, hidden metal panels slid open, revealing dozens of heavy machine gun turrets dropping from the ceiling, all of them locking their laser sights directly onto the center of Team 07. They had walked right into a trap. End of Part 3. Part 4, The Iron Cage. The high-pitched, mechanized whine of the turrets spinning up cut through the heavy air of the sub-basement. It was a sound Riley knew intimately from combat simulation, the terrifying precursor to a wall of lead. Cover, Kalen roared, his voice booming over the intercom's static. In a fraction of a second, the team scattered. Riley dove violently to his left, his body hitting the cold, damp concrete just as the turrets erupted in a deafening crescendo of automatic fire. Sparks showered the room as heavy-caliber bullets ripped through the air, completely shredding the ground where they had been standing a moment before. Riley scrambled behind the thick, steel base of a reinforced holding cage, pressing himself flat against the floor. The noise was absolute and overwhelming. Chunks of concrete and shattered iron rained down on his helmet and shoulders. Across the room, behind a massive support pillar, Jax and Doc were pinned down, unable to even peek around the edges without risking their heads being blown off. Kalen was crouched behind an overturned metal processing table only a few yards away from Riley, his silver eyes cold and analytical as he evaluated the kill zone. Silas. Kalen barked into his comms. Do you have eyes on the gallery? We need a distraction. Static hissed back. Captain signal, jammed deep underground. Silas's voice was completely broken, drowning in electronic interference. They were cut off. Up in the reinforced glass gallery, the scarred alpha leader of the Iron Fang watched the chaos with a sick, triumphant smile. His voice crackled over the speakers once more, barely audible over the relentless gunfire. You really thought we wouldn't notice the famous tactical Team 07 knocking on our door? You've cost us a lot of money, Cross. The black market doesn't like it when its supply chain of breeders is interrupted. So, I'm going to let these automated beauties chew you to pieces, and then I'm going to stream the footage to the government. Riley gritted his teeth, anger burning hot in his veins. The word breeders made him physically sick. He glanced at the turrets. There were 6 of them, mounted on tracks along the ceiling, sweeping the room in overlapping arcs of fire. They were automated, meaning they relied on motion and thermal tracking. Doc, Kalen yelled over the gunfire. EMP grenade? Shielded room, Captain. Doc shouted back, clutching his rifle tight to his chest. An EMP will bounce back and fry our own gear, including our night vision and comms. We'll be blind. Riley closed his eyes, his mind working at lightning speed. He calculated the sweep of the lasers, the rotation speed of the barrels, and the blind spots beneath the gallery. To bypass the thermal tracking, he needed to be fast. Faster than humanly possible. But his suppressor patch had a secondary, unintended side effect. It chemically lowered his core body temperature to mask his pheromone production. He was running cold. He might just be a small enough, fast enough blur to confuse the tracking software long enough to reach the wall. Captain, Riley said through the local squad channel, his voice startlingly calm. I can reach the junction box directly under the gallery window. If I can sever the primary hardline, the turrets will reboot. You'll have a 5-second window to blow the glass. Kalen's head snapped toward Riley, his expression furious. Absolutely not, Steele. It's suicide. Those are heavy military-grade sentries. If they track you for more than a second, you'll be cut in half. They won't track me, Riley replied, unbuckling his heavy tactical vest to shed excess weight. He kept only his weapon, his knife, and his utility belt. My body temperature runs naturally lower than an alpha's. The thermal sensors won't lock on immediately, and I'm faster than their mechanical rotation. I said no, Riley. Kalen commanded, the alpha authority in his voice flaring dangerously, demanding obedience. It was an instinctive roar, driven by a sudden, terrifying need to keep the young soldier exactly where he was. Safe. Riley met Kalen's silver eyes through the flying debris and sparks. With all due respect, sir, you brought me here to be a ghost. Let me do my job, or we all die in this cage. Kalen's jaw tightened so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. He hated the plan. Every protective instinct roaring in his blood told him to tackle Riley to the ground and shield him with his own body. But he was a captain first, and Riley was a soldier. 10 seconds, Kalen growled, his eyes burning with an intense, dark promise. If you don't make it to that wall, I am coming out there after you. Doc, prep the launcher. When the guns stop, you blow that glass. Copy that, Doc shouted, pulling a heavy, underbarrel grenade launcher from his pack. Riley took a deep, shuddering breath. He closed his eyes, visualizing the path. Left. Roll. Vault the cage. Slide. Go. Kalen barked. Riley exploded from cover. He didn't just run. He moved like water over stone. He dove beneath a sweeping arc of bullets, tucking his chin and rolling over his shoulder. The turrets whirred, their servos groaning as the targeting AI struggled to lock onto the small, fast, unnaturally cool thermal signature darting through the room. A line of bullets chewed the floor just inches from his boots. Riley didn't hesitate. He vaulted over a low concrete barrier, sliding on his knees across the blood-stained floor. He could feel the heat of the tracer rounds burning the air just over his head. The sheer adrenaline flooding his system was intoxicating. He was flying. With one final, desperate burst of speed, Riley threw himself into the deep, shadowy blind spot directly beneath the overhanging glass gallery. The turrets lost him. Their barrels spun wildly for a second, searching for the target, before returning to their default sweeping patterns. He made it, Jax yelled, genuine awe in his gruff voice. I don't believe it. Riley didn't waste a millisecond celebrating. He looked up. The thick bundle of fiber-optic cables running from the gallery control room to the ceiling turrets was housed in a steel conduit running down the wall. Riley drew his combat knife. The blade was forged from high-carbon titanium. He jammed the blade into the seam of the conduit, twisting violently until the metal snapped off. Exposing the thick, pulsing wires, Riley didn't bother trying to hack them. He grabbed the cables with both hands, braced his boots against the wall, and pulled with every ounce of strength he had. Sparks exploded in his face. The cables tore free with a harsh screech. Instantly, the deafening roar of the machine guns stopped. The turrets slumped forward, completely dead. The sudden silence in the room was ringing. Doc, now! Riley screamed, dropping to the floor and covering his head. Thump! The high-explosive round left Doc's launcher, arcing perfectly across the room. It struck the center of the reinforced gallery glass. The explosion was earth-shattering. The blast blew the bulletproof glass inward, showering the gallery in a deadly wave of shrapnel and smoke. Through the dust, Jax and Kalen were already moving, pushing up and raising their rifles. Breach, Kalen ordered. Riley was the first one up. He leaped onto a stack of supply crates, grabbed the jagged edge of the shattered window frame, and hauled himself into the control room. The scarred Alpha leader was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, stumbling backward and coughing in the thick smoke. He reached for a heavy magnum holstered at his waist, but Riley was faster. Riley launched himself forward, sweeping the man's legs out from under him. The terrorist crashed to the floor. Before he could react, Riley planted his knee firmly into the center of the Alpha's chest, pinning his dominant arm, and pressed the cold, sharp edge of his combat knife directly against the man's throat. Don't move a muscle, Riley hissed, his eyes dark, wild, and completely terrifying. A second later, Kalen vaulted through the window, followed by Jax and Document. The captain stalked forward, towering over the pinned terrorist. The dark timber sent rolling off Kalen was absolute fury, suffocating in its intensity. He looked down at the bleeding man, but his eyes quickly darted to Riley, scanning him for any sign of injury. When Kalen saw the long, ragged tear along the shoulder of Riley's uniform, where a bullet had passed mere millimeters from his skin, a dark, dangerous rumble built deep in the captain's chest. It was a purely primal sound, an alpha furious that a member of his pack had been endangered. Kalen reached down, grabbing the terrorist by the tactical collar of his shirt, and hauled him off the floor, tearing him away from Riley. He slammed the man against the control panels, so hard the metal dented. "Where are they?" Kalen demanded, his voice low and vibrating with lethal intent. "Where are the hostages?" The terrorist spat blood onto the console, laughing wetly. "You're too late, Cross. The merchandise was moved to the loading docks an hour ago. They're on trucks heading for the border tunnels. You can't catch them." "Doc, hack this console," Kalen ordered, ignoring the taunt. "Find the tunnel schematics." As Doc rushed to the computer, Kalen turned back to Riley. The massive alpha stepped into Riley's personal space, entirely ignoring Jax and the prisoner. Without asking, Kalen reached out, his heavy gloved hands gripping Riley's shoulders. He turned Riley slightly, inspecting the torn fabric, his thumbs pressing firmly, almost possessively, against Riley's collarbone. "Are you hit?" Kalen asked, his voice dropping to a low, rough whisper meant only for Riley. "No, sir. Just a scratch," Riley breathed out. Being this close to Kalen, feeling the sheer, overwhelming protective heat radiating from the man, was doing terrible things to his heart rate. His omega instincts, usually terrified of alpha dominance, were purring under Kalen's touch. Kalen's silver eyes locked onto Riley's. The mask of the cold, untouchable commander slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing the fiercely protective man underneath. "I told you to wait. You are the most reckless, insubordinate." Kalen trailed off, his jaw flexing. He slowly released his grip, his thumb lingering against Riley's neck for a second too long. "You did good, Ghost. But if you ever pull a stunt like that again, I will personally handcuff you to the transport plane." Riley offered a small, defiant smirk, completely breathless. "Understood, Captain." "Sir," Doc shouted from the console. "I have the schematics. There's an underground freight tunnel connected to the northern loading dock. But that's not all. I just found a countdown timer tied to the central power grid." "A bomb?" Jax asked, readying his weapon. "Worse," Doc said, his face paling as he looked at the screen. "He didn't just wire the base to blow. He opened the floodgates. The entire sublevel is tied to the nearby river dam. In exactly 4 minutes, this entire basement and the tunnel network is going to be instantly flooded with 1 million gallons of water." Kalen dropped the bleeding terrorist to the floor. "We have 4 minutes to intercept those trucks before the tunnel completely fills with water." He turned to the team, his eyes blazing. "We don't leave those people behind. Move." End of Part 4. Part 5, The Rising Tide. The blare of the base's emergency sirens was deafening, a harsh, mechanical scream that vibrated right through the soles of Riley's combat boots. The red warning lights bathed the shattered control room in a frantic, strobing pulse. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Doc yelled over the sirens, rapidly typing commands into the terminal to download the tunnel schematics to their tactical visors. "The floodgates are already initializing. We need to move now. Silas, we are moving to the northern loading docks." Kalen barked into the comms, shoving past the groaning terrorist leader on the floor. "Find a vantage point overlooking the extraction route. Give us covering fire." "Copy that, Captain. I'm already repositioning," Silas's voice crackled, the static finally clearing as he moved closer to the surface grates. Kalen didn't wait for the rest of the team. He hit the heavy steel door of the control room with his shoulder, forcing it open, and sprinted down the concrete stairwell. Riley was right on his heels, his agile frame easily keeping pace with the Alpha's massive strides. Behind them, Jax and Doc thundered down the stairs, their heavy weapons clanking against their armor. Every step they took down into the depths of the compound, the air grew colder and damper. The unmistakable, terrifying sound of rushing water echoed through the ventilation shafts. The dam was already bleeding into the sublevels. 2 minutes, Doc shouted. They burst through a set of double doors, sliding onto the polished concrete floor of the northern loading docks. The cavernous room was a hive of panicked activity. Iron Fang mercenaries were desperately loading crates of weapons into armored transport vehicles, abandoning their posts to flee the impending flood. At the far end of the dock, massive steel blast doors were slowly grinding open, revealing the gaping, pitch-black maw of the underground freight tunnel. 2 heavy transport trucks were already revving their engines, their exhaust pipes spewing thick black smoke. They're moving, Riley yelled, raising his rifle. Take them down, Kalen roared. The Phantom squad opened fire. Jack stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, his heavy machine gun roaring to life. A devastating hail of suppressive fire chewed through the mercenaries guarding the loading ramp, sending them diving for cover behind metal crates. Doc fired a concussive grenade, blowing the front axle off a nearby jeep to block the enemy's line of sight. Through the chaos, the sharp, unmistakable crack of a high-caliber sniper rifle echoed from somewhere high above the docks. The driver of the first transport truck slumped forward against the steering wheel, the horn blaring endlessly. First truck is immobilized, Silas reported smoothly over the comms. You're welcome. Jack's Doc, secure the first truck. Kalen commanded, never slowing his sprint. He reloaded his assault rifle seamlessly on the run. Steele, with me. We take the second. The second transport truck, heavily armored and reinforced with iron plating, swerved wildly around the immobilized first vehicle and accelerated straight into the dark freight tunnel. The driver was flooring it, desperate to escape the flooded sector. It's getting away. Riley pushed his legs harder, his lungs burning. He was fast, but a 6-ton armored truck had the mechanical advantage. Kalen glanced at the retreating vehicle, calculating the distance and speed with terrifying precision. Keep running, Steele. Don't stop. They breached the threshold of the dark tunnel, the damp air hitting them like a physical wall. The truck was 20 yards ahead and gaining speed. Riley's muscles screamed in protest, but he refused to slow down. He could smell the concentrated fear leaking from the back of that truck. The Omegas were inside, trapped in the dark. Suddenly, Kalen surged forward, his alpha physiology granting him a terrifying, explosive burst of speed. He caught up to Riley, grabbing the thick nylon strap of Riley's tactical vest. Jump on 3. Kalen yelled over the roar of the engine. 1, 2, 3. Riley leaped off the slick concrete. At the exact same moment, Kalen planted his boots, using his massive strength to physically launch Riley forward through the air. The momentum sent Riley flying toward the back of the accelerating truck. Riley collided heavily with the steel tailgate, his breath leaving him in a sharp gasp. He scrambled wildly, his tactical gloves gripping the cold iron hinges. He hauled his upper body onto the small bumper just as the truck hit a pothole, nearly bucking him off. Riley looked back. Kalen was sprinting desperately, but the truck was pulling away too fast. Captain! Riley screamed, reaching out his hand. Kalen didn't hesitate. He pushed off the ground, diving forward just as the truck shifted gears. His heavy, gloved hand clamped around Riley's forearm like a steel vise. The sudden, immense weight nearly pulled Riley entirely off the back of the vehicle. Riley let out a pained grunt, planting his boots against the doors and pulling backward with every ounce of his strength. With a final, feral growl, Kalen hauled himself up onto the bumper, his chest heaving. He immediately wrapped one arm firmly around Riley's waist, pinning the younger man to the back doors to keep him from falling into the dark tunnel rushing past them. 60 seconds. Doc's voice screamed over the radio, laced with pure panic. The primary gates are opening. The water is coming. Blow the lock, Kalen ordered, pressing his back against the truck to stabilize them both. Riley drew his combat knife, jamming the thick titanium blade directly into the electronic locking mechanism of the rear doors. He twisted violently, shattering the internal tumblers. Kalen kicked the latch, and the heavy metal doors swung outward into the darkness. They threw themselves inside, pulling the doors shut behind them just as a deafening, catastrophic rumble echoed from the loading docks behind them. The dam had broken. The interior of the truck was pitch black, illuminated only by a single, flickering red bulb on the ceiling. It reeked of diesel fumes, rust, and the overwhelming, heartbreaking scent of pure terror. Huddled in the corners of the truck, chained to heavy iron rings bolted to the floor, were roughly 15 Omegas. They were dressed in ragged civilian clothes, their faces pale, their eyes wide and completely feral with fear. When Kalen and Riley burst through the doors, a few of them let out choked, terrified sobs, trying desperately to back away from the two imposing figures in black tactical gear. The heavy, dominant scent of dark timber and thunder rolling off Kalen filled the small space instantly. To an Omega who had just been abducted by violent alphas, Kalen's immense presence wasn't comforting. It was a terrifying promise of more abuse. "Stay back!" One of the captives, a young man with bruised wrists, screamed, holding his hands up to shield his face. "Don't touch us." Kalen stopped in his tracks, realizing instantly that his alpha biology was making the situation infinitely worse. He lowered his rifle, raising his empty hands slowly, but the captives were completely panicked, thrashing against their chains. If the truck crashed, or if the water hit them while they were chained, they would drown. They needed to be unlocked immediately, but they were too frantic to be touched safely. "Captain, stand back," Riley said softly, his voice completely steady. Kalen looked at him, confusion flashing in his silver eyes. "Steele, we don't have time. I need to break those chains. If you move toward them right now, they'll panic and hurt themselves. Let me." Riley unslung his rifle, letting it drop to the metal floor with a clatter. He unbuckled his helmet, tossing it aside, running a hand through his dark, sweat-dampened hair. Slowly, deliberately, Riley walked toward the center of the terrified group. He dropped to his knees on the filthy metal floor, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. But it wasn't enough. He needed to prove he was safe. Riley reached up to the back of his neck. With 2 fingers, he gripped the edge of his illegal, military-grade suppressant patch and gently peeled back the top corner. Just a fraction. Just enough to break the chemical seal. Instantly, the sweet, calming scent of wild cherries and crushed ashes flooded the enclosed space of the truck. It completely cut through the sour stench of fear and the heavy dominance of Kalen's pheromones. It was a pure, unfiltered omega scent, soft, nurturing, and fundamentally designed by nature to soothe distress. The reaction was instantaneous. The crying stopped. The thrashing ceased. The 15 omegas blinked, their wide, terrified eyes locking onto Riley. The primal, biological recognition washed over them. "He is one of us. He is safe." "It's okay," Riley whispered, his voice incredibly soft, devoid of any military harshness. He offered a gentle, reassuring smile. "I know you're scared. I know what they did to you. But we are not them. We are here to take you home. Please, let us help you." The young man with the bruised wrists slowly lowered his hands, tears tracking through the dirt on his cheeks. He leaned forward, catching Riley's scent, and let out a shuddering breath of profound relief. You're an Omega." "Yes," Riley nodded, moving closer, pulling his lockpicks from his belt. "And I'm going to get these chains off you. Hold still." Standing by the rear doors, Kalen Cross watched the scene unfold in absolute, stunned silence. He had known Riley was an Omega, strictly on an intellectual and tactical level. But seeing it now, seeing the hardened, lethal, fiercely independent ghost of his squad drop his walls and radiate such profound, beautiful empathy, it did something dangerous to Kalen's chest. The scent of wild cherries filled Kalen's lungs, bypassing his military discipline and striking directly at his alpha core. A fierce, overwhelming possessiveness roared to life inside him. Not the ugly, controlling possessiveness of the Iron Fang, but a deeply ingrained, absolute need to protect this beautiful, brave creature standing in the dark. 10 seconds. Doc's voice broke through the comms, a frantic scream. "Captain, the water has breached the tunnels. Brace for impact." Kalen's head snapped up. A horrific roaring sound echoed from outside the truck, vibrating through the metal walls. It sounded like a freight train was right behind them. "Steele, get down," Kalen roared. Riley had just unlocked the final chain. He grabbed the 2 closest Omegas, pulling them down to the floor and shielding them with his own body. 1,000,000 gallons of violently churning river water hit the back of the transport truck. The impact was cataclysmic. The rear doors of the truck buckled inward under the sheer pressure of the wave. The entire 6-ton vehicle was lifted off its back tires, thrown violently forward into the dark tunnel. Metal screeched as the truck fishtailed, the driver completely losing control. The vehicle slammed aggressively into the curved concrete wall of the tunnel. Sparks exploded in a brilliant, blinding shower. Inside, the world flipped upside down. Crates shattered. The emergency light exploded into glass dust. Riley was thrown hard against the side panel, his breath knocked out of his lungs. Through the chaos and the violent tumbling, Riley felt a massive, immovable weight crash over him. Thick, heavily armored arms wrapped entirely around his torso, pulling him tight against a broad chest. Kalen had thrown himself across the compartment, caging Riley beneath him, taking the brunt of the flying debris and the violent impacts. "I've got you," Kalen grunted near Riley's ear, his voice strained as the truck rolled. "I've got you, Riley." The truck skidded on its side for another agonizing 50 yards before slamming into a structural pillar, coming to a dead, bone-shattering halt. Complete silence descended, broken only by the horrifying, steady sound of freezing water rapidly pouring into the crushed compartment. End of Part 5. Part 6, The Rising Tide of Truth. The freezing water was rising with terrifying speed. It surged through the buckled seams of the overturned transport truck, a violent, icy torrent that swallowed the darkness. Riley gasped, choking on a mouthful of dirty river water as he was jolted back to consciousness. His head throbbed, his ears ringing from the concussive force of the crash. The world was pitched at a sickening 90-degree angle, the truck resting heavily on its side. For a panicked second, Riley couldn't move. He was pinned. But it wasn't the twisted metal of the truck holding him down. It was a solid, heavily armored body pressing him safely against the ceiling of the cab. Kalen's arms were still locked securely around him, an immovable shield of muscle and tactical gear that had taken the lethal brunt of the impact. "Captain," Riley choked out, his hands urgently gripping Kalen's broad shoulders. "Captain, wake up." Kalen let out a low, rough groan, his silver eyes snapping open in the dim, flickering light of a sparking wire. It took him only a fraction of a second to assess the situation. The water was already up to their waists and rapidly climbing. He immediately looked down at Riley, his hands frantically checking the younger man's face and torso for injuries. I'm okay, Riley insisted, grabbing Kalen's wrists to stop his frantic searching. Their eyes met in the dark. The usual icy composure of the legendary Phantom Captain was completely gone, replaced by a raw, terrifyingly feral protective instinct. Kalen let out a heavy breath of relief, his thumb brushing over Riley's cheekbone in a fleeting, intimate gesture before the military commander took over once more. Kalen pushed off the wall, rising to his feet in the waist-deep water. "Report," he barked into the darkness. Cries and whimpers echoed from the back of the cab. The 15 Omegas were huddled together on what was now the floor, the side wall of the truck. They were bruised and soaked, but miraculously, none appeared fatally injured. Riley's quick thinking to unlock them before the crash had saved them from drowning at the bottom of the vehicle. "We need a way out," Riley yelled, wading through the freezing water to reach the group. He grabbed the hand of the young Omega with the bruised wrists, pulling him up above the rising waterline. "The back doors are jammed against the tunnel wall." Kalen sloshed his way to the rear of the truck, throwing his massive weight against the buckled steel doors. They didn't budge a single millimeter. Millions of gallons of water pressure were holding them completely shut. "It's a dead end," Kalen growled, his jaw locked in frustration. The water was at their chests now. The remaining air pocket inside the truck was shrinking by the second. Riley's tactical mind raced. "The emergency roof hatch," he shouted, pointing upward. Because the truck was on its side, the roof hatch was now directly above them, serving as a skylight to the flooded tunnel outside. Kalen looked up. The latch was sealed with a heavy, industrial locking bar. He reached up, his thick, tactical gloves gripping the cold iron. He planted his boots against the side wall and pulled. The Alpha let out a deafening, primal roar of exertion. The muscles in Kalen's back and shoulders strained against his uniform, fueled by a desperate, adrenaline-soaked need to get Riley and the others out of this metal coffin. With a harsh screech of tearing metal, the locking bar bent, and the hatch blew outward. River water immediately cascaded down through the opening, but it was their only exit. "You're up first, Steele," Kalen ordered, bracing his hands to give Riley a boost. "No, the Omegas first," Riley argued, his voice fierce and unyielding. "I'm not leaving them." Kalen's silver eyes flashed with intense admiration, but there was no time to argue. "Help me guide them." Together, they formed a human ladder. Riley stood on a submerged crate, grabbing the terrified civilians one by one and lifting them up, while Kalen used his immense strength to physically launch them through the hatch into the dark water of the tunnel. "Swim up. Find a ledge," Kalen shouted to each one. The water was at their necks now. The cold was agonizing, seeping into Riley's bones and causing his limbs to shake uncontrollably. The sheer physical exertion, combined with the freezing temperature, was wreaking absolute havoc on his body. But worse than the cold was the sensation at the back of his neck. The icy, churning water was completely washing away the medical adhesive of his suppressant patch. Riley felt it slip. He felt the exact, terrifying moment the patch detached completely and floated away into the dark water. 3 years of chemically suppressed biology came crashing back to the surface in a violent, overwhelming tidal wave. His scent, wild cherries, crushed ashes, and a deep, desperate note of distress exploded into the enclosed space. It was potent, unmasked, and intoxicating. Kalen froze. Standing chest-deep in the water, the massive Alpha's head snapped toward Riley. The scent hit Kalen's system like a physical blow to the chest. It bypassed every rational thought, striking the deepest, most primal core of his Alpha genetics. Mine. Protect. Mate. Kalen's pupils blew wide, consuming the silver of his irises until his eyes looked almost entirely black. Captain. Riley screamed, breaking Kalen from his trance as the water touched the ceiling. We have to go. Kalen surged forward, grabbing the last remaining Omega and throwing him up through the hatch. Then, without a moment of hesitation, Kalen wrapped his thick arm tightly around Riley's waist and kicked off the floor, propelling them both up through the narrow opening and into the flooded tunnel. The current outside the truck was incredibly strong. The world was a swirling, freezing nightmare of black water and floating debris. Riley kicked desperately, his lungs burning for oxygen, but his body was betraying him. The sudden withdrawal from the black market suppressants was sending his nervous system into toxic shock. His vision blurred, and a debilitating cramp seized his right leg. He started to sink. Before the dark water could drag him down, Kalen's hand clamped onto the tactical webbing of Riley's vest. The captain pulled Riley flush against his side, his powerful legs kicking against the heavy current with the strength of a titan. Kalen broke the surface, hauling Riley up with him. Riley gasped violently, coughing up river water as he clung to Kalen's broad shoulders. I've got you, Kalen rumbled, his deep voice vibrating against Riley's chest. The Alpha was treading water effortlessly, keeping them both afloat. Look for the maintenance catwalk. Through the gloom, the red emergency lights of the tunnel illuminated a steel grating bolted to the upper curve of the wall, about 10 feet above the waterline. The surviving Omegas were already clinging to the ladder, pulling themselves up onto the safe, dry metal. Kalen swam them to the rusted ladder. Climb, he ordered softly, his hand resting reassuringly on the small of Riley's back. Riley's fingers were numb. He pulled himself up the ladder with agonizing slowness, his muscles screaming. As he dragged himself over the edge of the catwalk, he completely collapsed onto the cold steel grating, his body racked with violent, uncontrollable shivers. Kalen climbed up behind him, dripping wet and breathing heavily. Before Kalen could even check on the civilians, the heavy clang of boots echoed down the catwalk. Captain. Jax and Doc emerged from the shadows, their weapons raised, their tactical flashlights cutting through the dark. They had managed to escape the loading dock via an upper access hatch before the water completely flooded the lower levels. We saw the truck go under. Jax shouted, running over. We thought you were. Jax stopped dead in his tracks. Doc, right behind him, froze entirely. The catwalk was perfectly still, except for the rushing water below. But the air was suddenly thick, heavy, and absolutely vibrating with a scent that completely short-circuited the brains of the two Alpha soldiers. Wild cherries. Crushed ashes. The pure, intoxicating distress of an unbonded Omega in need of protection. Jax's nostrils flared, his eyes widening in shock as they locked onto Riley's shivering form on the ground. The giant Alpha took a heavy, involuntary step forward, his primal instincts immediately trying to take over. What is that? Jax muttered, his voice dropping an octave, sounding rough and hungry. Doc looked equally stunned, his eyes dropping to the bare skin of Riley's neck, where the patch used to be. Steel? Captain, he's an Omega. The realization hit the two elite soldiers like a thunderbolt. They had been sleeping in the same barracks, fighting alongside, and mocking a genetic class they were taught to view as fragile property. The sudden urge to claim, to dominate, spiked violently in their bloodlines. Jax took another step toward Riley, reaching a massive hand out. Kid. A low, terrifying snarl tore through the tunnel. It wasn't human. It was the sound of an apex predator defending its territory. Before Jax could even blink, Kalen had stepped directly over Riley's prone body, placing himself squarely between his men and the shivering Omega. Kalen's alpha aura exploded outward, a crushing, suffocating wave of dark timber and rolling thunder that hit Jax and Doc so hard they physically stumbled backward. Take one more step toward him, Jax, Kalen warned, his voice a lethal, vibrating growl that promised absolute violence. His silver eyes were completely feral. Take one more step, and I will put a bullet in your knee. Jax raised his hands immediately, taking 2 rapid steps back, submitting to his superior officer's overwhelming dominance. Doc lowered his head, breathing hard to fight his own instincts. Captain, we didn't know. He is a phantom, Kalen snarled, his gaze locking onto his men with terrifying intensity. He just risked his life to save 15 civilians, and he outlasted all of you down there. He is my soldier, and if either of you ever look at him with anything less than absolute respect, I will kill you myself. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Jax swallowed hard, stepping back to check on the civilian Omegas instead. Kalen's lethal aura slowly receded. He turned his back on his men and immediately dropped to his knees beside Riley. The military commander faded away entirely, replaced by something incredibly soft and deeply desperate. Riley was curled on his side, his teeth chattering violently. The toxic shock of the suppressant withdrawal was peaking. His skin was deathly pale, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps. "Riley," Kalen whispered, pulling his heavy, soaked tactical vest off. He reached out, his warm, bare hands gently cupping Riley's freezing face. "Look at me. I'm right here." "Sea cold," Riley stuttered, his eyes squeezing shut. "It burns." Kalen didn't hesitate. He pulled Riley up from the steel grating, wrapping his large, muscular arms completely around the shivering Omega. Kalen pulled Riley entirely into his lap, pressing the younger man's freezing body flush against his own broad, desperately warm chest. Riley let out a small, broken sob of relief. His frozen hands instinctively curled into the fabric of Kalen's undershirt. His face pressed against the crook of Kalen's neck, directly into the source of the Alpha's grounding scent. The dark timber and mint wrapped around Riley's frantic nervous system like a soothing balm, finally quieting the burning agony in his veins. Kalen rested his chin gently against the top of Riley's wet hair. He held him impossibly tight, ignoring his shocked squad, ignoring the cold, ignoring the danger still lurking in Sector 0. For the first time in his entire life, the ruthless captain of the Phantom Squad realized he was no longer fighting just for his country. He was fighting for the boy trembling in his arms. End of Part 6. Part 7, Brothers in Arms. The maintenance catwalk was suspended in the shadows, vibrating with the sheer force of the flooded river rushing just a few feet below the steel grating. But for Riley, the only sound that mattered was the steady, heavy thumping of Captain Kalen Cross's heartbeat beneath his ear. Riley was violently trembling, his body curled entirely against Kalen's broad chest. The sudden, forced withdrawal from 3 years of black market suppressants was ravaging his nervous system. It felt like his veins were filled with crushed ice and liquid fire all at once. Every breath he took was a ragged gasp, but every time he inhaled Kalen's rich, grounding scent of dark timber and mint, the agonizing burn in his blood eased just a fraction. Kalen held him impossibly tight, one large hand buried in Riley's damp dark hair, pressing him close, while his other arm wrapped securely around Riley's waist. The Alpha commander was completely ignoring the soaking wet tactical gear, ignoring the freezing temperature of the underground cavern. His entire universe had violently narrowed down to the shivering Omega in his arms. "Doc," Kalen growled softly, not looking away from Riley. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Doc stepped forward cautiously, his tactical boots quiet on the metal grate. The medic had dealt with gruesome battlefield injuries, but navigating the volatile, intensely protective aura of a dominant Alpha guarding an unbonded Omega was a different kind of danger entirely. "Captain, I need to check his vitals," Doc said, keeping his voice low and deliberately calm to avoid triggering Kalen's aggressive instincts. "The chemical withdrawal from military-grade blockers is brutal. His nervous system is overloading. If we don't stabilize his core temperature, he could slip into a coma." Kalen's jaw clenched, his silver eyes flashing with a dangerous, helpless fury. He didn't want to let go, but he slowly, reluctantly loosened his iron grip, allowing Doc to kneel beside them. Riley whimpered slightly at the loss of Kalen's suffocating heat, his eyes squeezing shut. "I'm right here, Riley." "I'm not moving," Kalen promised, his voice a low, rumbling vibration that sent a wave of relief over Riley's frantic senses. Kalen shifted his grip, firmly holding Riley's trembling hand. Doc pulled a small auto-injector from his waterproof medical pouch. "This is a broad-spectrum nervous system stabilizer. It won't stop the withdrawal, but it will dull the pain and stop the tremors." He pressed the device against Riley's shoulder, a soft hiss signaling the dose. Almost immediately, the violent shaking racking Riley's small frame began to subside. His breathing deepened, losing its frantic, hyperventilating edge. He blinked his eyes open, his long lashes heavy with water, and looked up. Standing right beside Doc was Jax. The massive, towering Alpha, who had openly mocked Riley mere hours ago, was completely stripping off his heavy, waterproof tactical jacket. Underneath, he wore only a standard black combat shirt, leaving him exposed to the biting cold of the damp tunnel. Jax knelt down, holding the dry, fleece-lined jacket out. He deliberately kept his eyes averted from Riley's exposed neck, a sign of deep, instinctual respect. "Here," Jax rumbled, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. "Wrap him in this. I run hot anyway. I don't need it." Riley stared at the giant man, thoroughly stunned. In the vanguard infantry, if an alpha had discovered his secret, they would have thrown him to the wolves. But here, in the heart of the deadliest squad in the military, Jax was offering him the coat off his back. "Thank you," Riley whispered, his voice incredibly hoarse. Jax looked up, meeting Riley's eyes. There was no pity in the giant's gaze, and absolutely none of the dark, predatory hunger that usually haunted the eyes of alphas. There was only the solemn, unwavering respect of one soldier looking at another. "You saved us back there in that kill box, Steel. You threw yourself at those turrets so we could live. Omega, Beta, whatever the hell the brass wants to call you. You are a phantom. You're our brother." A hot tear slipped down Riley's cheek, mixing with the cold river water. For his entire life, he had been running from his biology, terrified that his true nature made him weak, made him nothing more than a victim. But looking at Jax, at Doc, and finally up into Kalen's fiercely protective silver eyes, Riley realized the truth. He hadn't just found a team to fight with. He had found his pack. Suddenly, the static of their earpieces broke the heavy, emotional silence. "Captain, do you copy? This is Silas." The sniper's voice was distorted but audible. Kalen instantly shifted back into commander mode, though he kept his arm firmly wrapped around Riley's shoulders, helping the younger man sit up and pull Jax's oversized jacket tightly around his freezing body. "Silas, go ahead. We are alive. We are on the maintenance catwalks above the sublevels." "Thank God." Silas breathed a heavy sigh of relief over the comms. "The main compound above ground is in absolute chaos. The flooding compromised their perimeter defenses. Most of the Iron Fang mercenaries are scattering into the woods. I managed to hijack one of their heavy armored transports near the northern ventilation grate. What is your status? How many packages do we have?" "We have all 15 civilian hostages," Kalen reported, looking over at the huddled group of Omegas. They were watching Riley with wide, hopeful eyes, anchored by the soothing scent of wild cherries that still lingered in the air around him. "We are moving to your position. Send us the coordinates to the access grate." "Coordinates sent. But Captain, move fast." The scarred bastard who leads this cell didn't run. He's rallying his elite guard near the transport. He knows you have to come up for air eventually. "Understood. Team 07, we're moving out," Kalen ordered, rising to his full, imposing height. Riley forced himself to stand. His legs felt like lead, and his head swam from the lingering effects of the medication, but he stubbornly locked his knees, refusing to be a liability. Kalen immediately stepped to his side, wrapping a supportive arm securely around Riley's waist, taking half of his weight without a word. "Can you walk?" Kalen asked softly. "I can fight," Riley replied, his dark eyes flashing with a familiar, dangerous spark. A small, proud smirk touched Kalen's lips. "I know you can." They moved as a single, cohesive unit. Jax took the point, his heavy machine gun raised, moving like an impenetrable shield through the dark corridors. Doc brought up the rear, keeping a close eye on the 15 terrified civilians. And in the center, Riley guided them, his natural, unsuppressed Omega presence acting as an emotional beacon for the traumatized hostages. They followed his scent through the suffocating darkness, finding courage in his quiet strength. It took 20 agonizing minutes of climbing narrow, rusted maintenance stairwells to reach the surface. The air grew fresher, losing the smell of damp concrete and replacing it with the sharp scent of pine and pouring rain. They reached a massive iron grate set into the ceiling of a concrete tunnel. Rainwater poured down through the bars. Jack slammed the butt of his rifle against the locking mechanism, shattering it. He pushed the heavy grate upward, flipping it over onto the muddy ground of the forest floor above. "Clear," Jax grunted, pulling himself up into the storm. One by one, they hauled the civilians out of the hole, pushing them into the dense brush for cover. Kalen climbed out next, immediately turning back and reaching his heavy hands down to grab Riley by the tactical harness, lifting him effortlessly out of the shaft. They emerged into a nightmare. The forest clearing was lit up by the glaring, blinding halogen headlights of the armored transport vehicle Silas had hijacked. But Silas wasn't in the driver's seat. He was pinned behind a massive fallen oak tree, laying down desperate sniper fire as a dozen heavily armed Iron Fang mercenaries closed in on his position. Standing in front of the headlights, completely ignoring the rain and the gunfire, was the scarred Alpha leader. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He was holding a heavy grenade launcher, aiming it directly at the tree Silas was hiding behind. "Did you really think you could steal from my cages, Cross?" The leader roared into the storm, his voice amplified by the clearing. "Did you think I would let you take my property?" The scarred Alpha turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto the group emerging from the grate. The wind shifted, blowing the pure, sweet scent of wild cherries directly across the clearing. The leader's eyes widened, a sick, twisted hunger replacing his rage as he zeroed in on Riley standing beside Kalen. Well, I didn't know the famous Phantom Squad was hiding a prize like that. Kill the Alphas. Bring me the little one alive. He'll fetch a fortune on the black market. Kalen Cross didn't just get angry. He completely shattered. The sound that ripped from Kalen's chest was not human. It was the terrifying, earth-shaking roar of an apex predator watching a threat step toward its mate. The sheer, crushing force of his alpha aura exploded across the clearing, so violently powerful that the advancing mercenaries physically hesitated, their instincts screaming at them to run from the monster in the dark. Jax, suppressive fire. Kalen roared. Jax stepped out of the brush, planting his feet in the mud, and pulled the trigger on his heavy machine gun. A deafening wall of lead tore through the treeline, shredding bark and forcing the mercenaries to dive for the mud. Silas. Now. Doc yelled, firing his own rifle to cover the sniper's flank. Silas broke from his cover, sprinting toward the open back doors of the armored transport, returning fire with lethal precision. The scarred leader cursed, raising his grenade launcher to blow Jax and the civilians to pieces. Riley didn't think. The medication was still clouding his mind, his hands were still shaking from the cold, but his instincts were sharper than a razor. He shrugged off Jax's heavy coat, raising his assault rifle. He didn't have the physical strength left to fight in close quarters, but he didn't need it. He was a phantom. Riley took a deep breath, letting the chaotic noise of the battlefield completely fade away. He exhaled slowly, locking his sights onto the leader. Crack. The single shot echoed through the clearing, piercing cleanly through the storm. The scarred Alpha screamed, dropping the grenade launcher as a high-caliber round shattered his right shoulder, effectively blowing his arm backward. He collapsed into the mud, writhing in agony. Before the leader could even attempt to reach for a sidearm with his left hand, Kalen was there. Moving with terrifying, blinding speed, Kalen crossed the distance, slamming his heavy combat boot directly onto the leader's chest, pinning him to the earth. Kalen raised his rifle, his silver eyes completely devoid of mercy, and put a single round through the terrorist's head. The remaining mercenaries, seeing their leader executed with such brutal efficiency, immediately broke rank and fled into the dark forest, terrified of the wrath of Team 07. Silence fell over the clearing, save for the heavy drumming of the rain. Get the civilians in the transport. Kalen barked, his chest heaving as he turned away from the body. Jax and Doc quickly ushered the 15 Omegas into the heavily armored back of the vehicle. Silas jumped into the driver's seat, revving the massive engine. Riley lowered his rifle, his adrenaline crashing hard. He swayed on his feet, the world spinning violently around him. His knees finally buckled. He didn't hit the mud. Kalen caught him before he could fall. The captain swept Riley up into his arms, carrying him bridal style through the pouring rain. Riley buried his face in the crook of Kalen's neck, completely exhausted, completely safe. "I've got you," Kalen whispered against Riley's wet hair as he carried him toward the transport. "You're safe now, my beautiful brave ghost. We're going home." End of Part 7. Part 8, The Phantom's Heart. The interior of the stolen armored transport was dark, filled with the heavy, rhythmic rumble of the massive diesel engine and the relentless drumming of the rain against the steel roof. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the overwhelming sound of gunfire and sirens had faded into nothing but a memory. Riley lay sideways across the wide, metal bench seat in the back of the vehicle. He was completely wrapped in Jax's heavy, fleece-lined tactical coat, but the true source of his warmth was the man sitting right beside him. Captain Kalen Cross had not moved an inch. The massive Alpha had Riley's head resting securely in his lap, one large, calloused hand gently and continuously stroking through Riley's damp hair. Across the aisle, the 15 rescued civilians were huddled under emergency thermal blankets Doc had distributed. They were exhausted, traumatized, but alive. Every so often, one of them would look over at Riley, their eyes filled with a profound, unspoken gratitude. The soft, unsuppressed scent of wild cherries and crushed ashes radiating from Riley was keeping the entire cabin in a state of absolute, necessary calm. Doc knelt on the vibrating floorboards next to Riley, carefully taping a small 4-line to the back of Riley's hand. "His core temperature is finally stabilizing," Doc murmured, his voice low so as not to wake the sleeping civilians. He looked up at Kalen, his expression filled with a deep, newfound respect. "The toxic shock from the suppressant withdrawal is passing. He's going to be weak for a few days, and his biology is going to have to relearn how to function without being chemically suffocated, but he's going to make it. He's incredibly tough. Toughest kid I've ever seen. Jax grunted from his post near the rear doors, his heavy machine gun resting across his lap. The giant alpha looked at Riley, a protective scowl on his scarred face. If Vanguard Infantry Command ever tries to come looking for him, they'll have to go through my heavy artillery first. They won't, Kalen said softly, his silver eyes never leaving Riley's pale face. Steele's old military file is going to experience a catastrophic deletion error before the sun comes up. As of right now, Riley Steele does not exist to the regular army. He is a ghost. He belongs to Team 07. Riley's dark eyes fluttered open at the sound of the captain's deep, rumbling voice. His body ached down to the bone, a deep, heavy soreness that made lifting a finger feel like moving a mountain. But for the first time in 3 years, the burning, localized agony at the base of his neck was completely gone. He took a slow, deep breath. The air tasted clean. He didn't have to monitor his heart rate. He didn't have to hide. "Captain," Riley whispered, his voice incredibly hoarse. Kalen leaned down immediately, his powerful presence completely shielding Riley from the rest of the world. "I'm right here, Riley. Just rest. We are an hour away from a classified black site medical facility. It's fully under my command. No one there will hurt you, and no one will ask questions." The Omegas?" Riley asked, trying to turn his head to look across the aisle. "They are safe," Kalen assured him, his thumb gently brushing over Riley's cheekbone. "I've already contacted an underground extraction network. Once we hit the base, they will be given new identities and smuggled across the border to an allied nation where our genetic laws don't apply. They are going to be free, Riley. Because of you." A heavy, emotional weight lifted off Riley's chest. A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye, soaking into the dark fabric of Kalen's pants. He closed his eyes, leaning into the warmth of the Alpha's hand. "Thank you." "Sleep, my ghost," Kalen murmured, the dark timber and mint scent rolling off him in a soothing, protective wave. "I've got the watch." When Riley woke up again, the world was quiet. He wasn't on a vibrating metal bench, and he wasn't shivering in a muddy training camp. He was lying in a real bed, with impossibly soft white sheets and a thick down comforter. The room was softly lit by sunlight filtering through high, frosted glass windows. A steady, rhythmic beeping came from a heart monitor next to his bed. He blinked, taking in the sterile but comfortable medical room. He tried to sit up, wincing slightly as his sore muscles protested, but the debilitating weakness was gone. He reached up to the back of his neck instinctively. His fingers met bare, unblemished skin. No patch. No chemicals. Just him. The door to the private room slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. Jax, Silas, and Doc walked in. They were out of their tactical gear, dressed in standard black base fatigues. The moment they saw Riley sitting up, the heavy tension they had been carrying completely vanished. "Well, look who finally decided to join the land of the living," Silas drawled, leaning against the doorframe with his trademark sharp grin. "You slept for 48 hours straight, kid. We were starting to think we'd have to draw on your face with a marker just to entertain ourselves." Riley offered a small, tired smile. "Try it, Silas, and I'll bypass the electrical grid in your quarters." Jax let out a booming laugh that shook the walls. He walked over, carrying a massive plastic bag that smelled like pure heaven. "Don't tempt him, Silas. The kid's got faster hands than you." Jax set the bag on the tray table across Riley's lap. "Hospital food here tastes like wet cardboard. So, I requisitioned some real food. Double bacon cheeseburgers, fries, and a chocolate shake." "Requisitioned." Doc raised an eyebrow, checking the 4 line on Riley's arm. "You bribed the quartermaster by threatening to throw him off the roof." "Tactical negotiation," Jack shrugged, utterly unrepentant. He looked down at Riley, his expression softening completely. "Eat up, kid. You need your strength if you're going to keep saving our asses in the field." Riley looked at the 3 lethal alphas standing around his bed. There was no hostility. No predatory dominance. Just the easy, comfortable banter of a squad looking out for their own. The scent in the room was relaxed, a blending of their natural pheromones that no longer felt suffocating, but rather like a warm, protective blanket. I don't know what to say," Riley murmured, looking down at his hands. "After everything you guys were taught about Omegas, you're just accepting this?" "Steele," Doc said gently, taking a seat on the edge of the mattress. "What the brass teaches in boot camp is political garbage meant to control people. What we saw down in that flooded tunnel was a soldier who stared death in the face and didn't blink. You're a phantom. Blood, sweat, and mud. That's all that matters to us. Besides, Silas added, tossing a small, encrypted black datapad onto the bed. The captain made it official. Your new file. Genetic classification. Highly classified. Rank. Infiltrator specialist. You're stuck with us now. Before Riley could process the overwhelming surge of gratitude, the door hissed open again. Captain Kalen Cross stepped into the room. He was dressed in a dark gray tactical sweater and black slacks, looking impossibly broad and handsome. The air in the room instantly shifted, snapping to attention under the sheer, effortless authority of the squad leader. All right, that's enough overwhelming the patient, Kalen ordered, though his tone was fond. Clear out. Let him eat. Yes, sir, Jack saluted lazily, giving Riley a quick clap on the shoulder. See you in the gym when you're cleared, Steele. Try not to embarrass Vane too badly next time. The three men filed out, the doors sliding shut behind them, leaving the room in a thick, suddenly electric silence. Kalen walked slowly to the side of the bed. He looked down at Riley, his silver eyes trailing over the younger man's face, taking in the returned color to his cheeks, the brightness in his dark eyes. The scent of wild cherries in the room was pure in content, intertwining perfectly with Kalen's dark timbre. How are you feeling? Kalen asked softly, pulling a chair close to the bed and sitting down. Like I was hit by a 6-ton transport truck, Riley admitted with a small, breathless laugh. But also like I can finally breathe. The civilians, across the border. Safe and sound, Kalen confirmed. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, clasping his heavy hands together. He looked at Riley with an intensity that made Riley's heart completely skip a beat. You terrify me, you know that? Riley blinked in surprise. I do. When you dove in front of those automated turrets. Kalen's jaw tightened, a shadow of genuine fear crossing his features. I have led countless Black Ops missions. I have watched men die. But in that moment, watching you risk everything, my heart completely stopped, Riley. I realized that if I lost you, I wouldn't just be losing a soldier. I would be losing my entire world. Riley's breath hitched. He looked into Kalen's eyes, seeing the raw, unfiltered truth burning there. The walls were completely down. Slowly, Riley pushed the tray table aside. He reached out, his slender, unbruised fingers gently tracing the heavy line of Kalen's jaw. The Alpha instantly leaned into the touch, letting out a soft, rumbling sigh that vibrated deep in his chest. You didn't lose me, Kalen, Riley whispered, using the captain's first name like a sacred promise. I'm right here. I'm not running anymore. Kalen reached up, his large hand gently covering Riley's smaller one against his cheek. I don't want you to just survive, Riley. I want you to live. I want you to have a home. And if you'll let me, I want to be that home. Riley's heart swelled until he thought it might burst. He had spent his whole life believing that his biology cursed him to a life of pain and subjugation. He had joined the military expecting to die alone in the mud. But instead, he had found brothers who respected him, a cause worth fighting for, and a man who looked at him like he was the most precious, powerful thing in the universe. Riley didn't answer with words. He leaned forward, ignoring the dull ache in his ribs, and closed the distance between them. When their lips met, it wasn't a spark, it was a wildfire. Kalen let out a low, desperate groan, his arms coming up to wrap securely around Riley's waist, pulling him carefully but firmly against his broad chest. The kiss was deep, passionate, and laced with the overwhelming relief of survival. It was an alpha and an omega, not bound by chains or societal laws, but choosing each other freely as equals. Riley melted into the embrace, his hands burying themselves in the dark hair at the nape of Kalen's neck. He tasted coffee, rain, and absolute devotion. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing heavily, Kalen rested his forehead against Riley's. The silver eyes looking back at Riley were filled with a bright, blinding future. Welcome home, my beautiful ghost, Kalen whispered against his lips. Riley smiled, a true, radiant expression that lit up the entire room. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was Riley Steele. A phantom, a brother, a fighter, and he was exactly where he belonged. End of story. Hello, everyone. We've reached the end of this breathtaking 8-part adventure, and honestly, my heart rate still hasn't fully returned to normal. This journey we took with Riley and Kalen in the Shaded Universe wasn't just an action-packed survival story. It was an incredible tale about identity, acceptance, and what true family really means. Let's take a closer look at what we actually explored in the subtext of this series. The biggest theme at the heart of the story is definitely the found family dynamic. Riley fled his abusive biological family and a corrupt society that oppressed him simply because of his biology, seeking refuge in the military. The greatest irony and beauty of it all was that he found true brotherhood among the harsh, ruthless elite alphas he was told to fear the most. The camaraderie hidden beneath Jax's massive, intimidating exterior, and that pivotal scene where he gave Riley his own jacket was one of the series' most critical turning points. Team 07 showed us that the toxic hierarchy society and the military taught them was actually a massive lie. For them, it wasn't about genetic codes. It was about the trust in the trenches where they fought shoulder to shoulder. Riley's character development was simply phenomenal. That illegal suppressor patch on his neck was actually an invisible shackle forced upon him by society. During the flood in the tunnel, the patch completely washing away and Riley's true scent, his true identity, being revealed was an incredibly powerful metaphor. Riley didn't become weak when he stopped hiding. On the contrary, while calming those terrified hostages, he proved just how much power and healing empathy his Omega nature actually held. He wasn't a victim waiting to be saved. He was a true hero who saved his team. And of course, Kalen Cross. The romantic dynamic between Kalen and Riley completely shattered the classic boy love tropes we know. Kalen respected Riley not because he was an Omega, but because he was a skilled, brave soldier who never gave up despite everything. Kalen's protectiveness was never the kind that caged or restricted Riley. Rather, it was a shield that allowed him to fight freely in the shadows, waiting only to catch him if he fell. That final scene in the hospital room wasn't just a biological attraction. It was the union of two equal souls who trusted each other and became each other's home in the middle of a war. Thank you all so much for experiencing this 8-part adventure with me, and for sharing in this dark yet hopeful world in every episode. I hope the story of Riley and the Phantom Squad has found a special place in your hearts too. If you enjoyed this series and the analysis, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your favorite scene from the story with me in the comments below. Your support gives me the greatest motivation to produce brand new, exciting series like this one. That's all from me for now. See you in brand new stories and new videos. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.